It is wonderful to welcome Dayna Manning on this show for the third time. She's a wonderful
Hello.
singer-songwriter from Ontario, and today we're discussing the reissue of her debut album, Volume 1. Dayna, how's
Yeah,
it going?
great. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how are you how are you surviving the heat of the Ontario summer?
Well, I am currently in Nova Scotia. I kind of go
Oh,
back and forth. Um, and it's been very hot in Nova Scotia. So pretty much every day at the end of the day, I go take the dog to the lake and go swimming. And so that part is fun, but keeping the house cool has been a challenge.
oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I take up swimming too every summer just so that I could cool off.
Yeah. It's probably warm where you are too.
Oh yeah, very much so. Hanoi, it's
Yeah.
notoriously hot during this
Okay.
time of year.
Yeah.
So, tell me about some of your plans this summer.
This summer has been great. I've been running some folk army day camps in Stratford, which is where it's a really great spot where a lot of kids play music for the first time on an instrument. Like they'll do stuff at school, but a lot of folk kids come to play ukulele or guitar there for the first time. And so it's for kids ages 7 to 13, and there's about 20 kids, and then my older students are the counselors, and we do a lot of learning a variety of folk and pop music, and we prepare for a concert at the end of the week. So we tie dye our uniforms and decorate our stage, and it's really a fun time for the kids to get an intro to music. Yeah. So I
Wonderful.
do two of those, one in July and one in August. I have a few shows, a couple in Nova Scotia, a couple in Ontario, uh, mainly in August. And then actually in September, we will be in Stratford full time for the year because I'm going to do my master's in community music at Wilfrid Laurier University, which is really exciting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah. So, are you starting your master's this year?
Yeah, I'm starting in September.
Okay. Well, I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a bit strange to go back to school for me, but that's what's happening.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, tell me more about the folk army's continuing success.
Yeah. Well, the folk army is pretty cool. It's ended up being its own um growing entity. Oh, I guess the other thing that I'm working on is I've already produced one record for one of my students named Hannah Thomas, who you know
Oh, yeah.
about. And I'm working on two EPs for students of mine, Lauren Nielsen and Caitlin Pham. They're all original music this time, and they'll be pretty acoustic with just a little bit of production, and hoping to put those out in the fall. So I'm gonna launch Folk Army Records with those albums, and then my real plan, my hope is that I can just kind of help be that person who helps those kids put out their first album. And I don't know what they do with that, if they get a record deal or they get a publishing deal and they move on, but I want to be someone who helps facilitate the really talented writers um, to document their songs for the first time. So yeah, so that's where this folk army thing has kind of led. Lauren I met, I think, when she was 11, maybe 12, and she had never played a lick of guitar in her life. So she's very much a prodigy student of mine. And then Caitlin comes from a really, really talented musical family. So she already knew how to play guitar when I met her, and I've just been mentoring her with songwriting and showing her how things work, you know. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, and I look forward to checking out their music.
Yeah, you'll enjoy it. It's really nice.
Yeah. So, tell me about the people who help work on your first album, Volume 1.
Volume one, yeah. So that was a really crazy time for me. I definitely wrote every song on that album thinking that no one would hear it except my four-bedroom walls and my friends. Um, but I had a babysitting job at the time where I babysat this young boy. I think he was 3 or 4. and the parents owned a restaurant in town, and they ended up splitting up. And the dad moved back to Toronto, and the kids' grandparents all lived in Toronto. And so once a month, they would hire me as a babysitter to take him on the train to Toronto from Stratford. I would stay with the family, and uh, then I would, um, oh, just one second. Yeah, I might have to, okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, sorry about that. Uh, I would take the kid on the train to Toronto, and stay the weekend with the family. So whether that be his grandparents or his other grandparents and his dad sometimes. But I would actually go out in the evenings to the open stages in Toronto and play my guitar. And I was pretty young. I was maybe 16 or 17 years old. And I, of course, didn't tell my parents I was doing this. I think I don't know how I got away with it in hindsight, but I would walk into these places with my guitar on my back and sign up for the open mic sheet and play all over Toronto. I don't even remember how I navigated finding the bar. I don't remember how to, or the venue that I was playing in. I don't remember how you did that before the internet, but I did that, and I met Ray Coburn, who ended up producing my first album, and a lady named Sandy McNevin, both on the same night at a place called Lee's Palace when there was a band called the Carpet Frogs playing, and they let me up to play, and everyone was really loved what I did, and they liked my songs, and I started chatting with these two people, and they have had lots of experience in the music business, and kind of took me under their wing to show me the ropes. Ray set up a spec deal with a studio called Phase One in the B room there with a man named Harry Hess, who's an engineer and mastering engineer, mixing engineer, really, and musician himself, really talented singer, who still makes records today. And he believed in what I was doing in my songs, and he kind of fronted the time, and the musicians fronted their time to make the record. And then we went around to different labels, kind of shopped around some of the demos that we've been working on. And then we set up different meetings. I played at Sony, I played at Warner, I played at EMI, I even played at a place called Private Music in LA. It was the first time I ever got to go in a limousine on an airplane kind of to see to meet these folks. And yeah, there's lots of interest in the record. And then we ended up selling it to EMI Music Canada, and they helped complete it with picking out someone to mix it, and starting to release singles and making music videos and this whole thing. And I was really, really young when I made the record. I think I made the record between the ages of 16 and 18. It was over many years because it wasn't like I didn't even have all the songs. Like we just would record one and produce it up and kind of work on the next one whenever Harry had time around other projects. Yeah, there was lots of fun highlights that happened at the time. One was that I got to meet Sean Ono Lennon in Lee's Palace, the same place I met Ray. I was opening up for a band called The Pursuit of Happiness here in Canada, and they were pretty popular at the time. And I guess Sean had come down to Lee's Palace to see the stage because Yoko Ono was playing there a few days later. And I happened to be on the stage when he saw it, and he heard a couple of my songs and started talking to me after the show. And we really hit it off. We just talked about music, talked about whatever, and probably talked for half an hour. And then I went to the washroom, and someone says to me, "Hey, do you know who you're talking to?" And I was like, "Yeah, his name's Sean. Do you know him? He's really nice." And they said, "Well, yeah, he's John Lennon's son." And I said, "Whoa, I had no idea." And we ended up going next door and having a bite. And the next day I had the studio book. So he came to the studio with me and his friend Timo Ellis. And we just ended up recording a song called My Kind for that album, which is probably my favorite track on the record. I actually produced that record. It's my first production on record. And yeah, we had a fantastic time. So that's a really neat memory for me, meeting him and recording that. Um, I guess what happens next is crazy. Like we went to California, we shot the video for the first single, which was called Half the Man. And Half the Man was an interesting single to have at the time because it didn't have any drums really or percussion. It was very acoustic guitar, finger picking bass with this kind of um, well, synthesizer sitar that runs through it and some stacked vocals. And it did pretty well at pop radio, which was a bit of a surprise, and did okay on Much Music, which was our video channel at the time, way back in the olden days. And then we ended up putting out a single called My Addiction, which we made a really crazy, fun video for that did really well. But I think when I look back at it, and when I listened to the record last week when it came out again, I hadn't listened to it in a decade. I really felt like it was like my Eras tour, but all on one record. It's acoustic to pop to kind of heavy metal to alternative. Like it's a very, very diverse, and even throwbacks to like 1700s and different instrumentation. I really loved it again when I listened to it, whereas sometimes in my life I've maybe felt differently about it. But yeah, I really loved it and really felt that it encompassed all the things that I was into at the time and all the production types that I was into at the time. Um, I think after that, I was a bit discouraged from doing that on albums. And I started using the same bands for my next couple of albums, and they're maybe less interesting than they could have been if I had produced them that way. But I think a big part of that record was Ray Coburn. He was a really talented programmer and synthesizer, and you can hear how talented he is on those tracks. And we really collaborated. I had very strong ideas of what I wanted it to sound like, and he knew how to do it. So it was a very, very fun time and exciting. But at the same time, I was a young kid who knew nothing and very lucky to have the opportunity to do that. It led to tours. I toured the first Lilith Fair and the second Lilith Fair. I got to open up for Radiohead with that album, which was amazing here in Canada. I toured with a band called Great Big Sea here and 5440 and Wide Mouth Mason and a lot of different Canadian bands that I really idolized. Spirit of the West, I did a whole tour with them. And it just flipped my life upside down. And it was a strange time for me because I didn't know anything else. I was just becoming an adult. And so I kind of got addicted to like going places and traveling and not being at home for more than 2 weeks. Like that was my routine. And I really feel really lucky that I got to do that and see this country as many times as I did and see all the other places outside of the country that I was able to go to. And I really, really realized that I loved that adventure of being a musician and all the people that I met and all the places I got to go. And so that's how kind of my band Trent Seven started, was really falling in love with all these different places and people and wanting to sing about them. But yeah, that's a good summary, I guess, of my volume one experience. I was nominated for a Juno for that album. I was also nominated for a radio award of some sort and a YTV Achievement Award. But there's a lot of things that happened that I don't even remember because I had social anxiety. I wouldn't talk to the bands I was opening for because I was intimidated by them. I was always managing that level of anxiety. So sometimes I wasn't able to actually really be present. I was just doing what I needed to do my show. And so there's a lot of things I don't even remember that happened that people will tell me, like, you remember playing here? I was like, no, I don't remember at all. It might be just the age and the time, but yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah. And of course, the album is certainly very experimental, if I can call it. You're trying on all these different sounds of the time, and the product is a very interesting one. And of course, it fits the time too, because the '90s was a very interesting time too for women in music, and there are
Yeah.
all these different sounds that existed, and many of them became popular.
Mhm. Yeah, the I can hear everything from Simon and Garfunkel to the Cranberries to Tool and Rage Against the Machine on that album, and that's really what I was into at the time. Um, well, actually, my favorite album was Tom Petty Wildflowers. Do you know that album?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was mildly obsessed with that album at the time, and I really used it as my guide for songwriting, like writing a collection of songs. I even loved the album cover and did my artwork like his artwork. Um, I learned about um, what person to sing in, like maybe not to sing in first person from him. It was just a big learning experience that I loved that album and really studied it hard and then used it in my own album. I remember one thing in the studio in Half the Man. There's a point where I do that kind of a blues note, like Joni Mitchell does, like da 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 at the end. And I didn't know what that was. And Ray, my producer, said, "Why don't you sing that end like Joni Mitchell, like the blues note?" And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." I had never listened to Joni Mitchell yet. I hadn't even listened to her yet. It was such a wild thing. So after he told me that, that's when I started listening to Joni Mitchell. Um, oh, I remember also even just I had just started listening to the Beatles when I met Sean. I think I had got Revolver, Rubber Soul and Revolver, just maybe a month before when I met him. It was all everything was new to me. And I just I don't know, I just had a fresh perspective, fresh eyes, knew what I wanted to do, and I wasn't influenced that much of things in the past. It was more current influences that were influencing me. My dad was also a music teacher, so I was around music my entire life. Um, I'd played guitar since I was 13. I'd played piano my whole life. I'd take singing lessons my whole life. So I was kind of primed um, to have this job, you know?
Yeah, and yeah, I believe Rick Rubin produced the Wildflower album, right? The Tom Petty one.
He did. Yeah. And Jim Scott engineered it, and I ended up working with Jim on my next album. And I remember listening to the album thinking, like, this album just sounds a cut above everything I've ever heard. And it really still does. Those acoustic guitars and the drum sounds, and they're just phenomenal. And I think really make the production. I think the sounds make the production. And I remember thinking that, and then he got engineer at, of the year at the Grammys for it that year. And I thought, oh yeah, okay, I do have an ear for this. And um, my next record, I actually seeked out Jim, and he actually produced my second album, Shades.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't believe we've discussed it in our last conversation, but have you had a chance to check out Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act, yet?
Oh no, I haven't, but I definitely want to. Will you type me the name of it in the chat?
Yeah, yeah, of
Is
course.
it-
So it's more or less a series of meditations on the the act of creativity, and for the most part, he focuses on music, but the whole book details in some ways a way of being. That's his subtitle. How
Hmm,
can a creative person live in his art and in his life? So
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, I'd love to. I remember at the time always fighting with my producer saying like Kim kind of saying like, "Oh, well, you're making this for other people now." And I'm like, "No, no, no. No, I'm making my vision."
mhm.
And when I make my vision, um, that's my contribution to other people is trying to make my true vision come alive. And I heard Rick Rubin saying that in an Instagram spot or an interview that he did once, and I thought that's exactly what I was trying to say to my producer at the time, that everybody's unique perspective is what makes that art so unique, and you can tell when someone's kind of compromised that true vision for their art, I think, and that's what I found he talks a lot about, which I would appreciate to know more about.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, he said that the audience comes last.
The audience does, yeah, comes last. And I would say that to my producer and he gets so mad at me. I didn't say it exactly like that, but yeah.
Yeah, because I think even if even as like consumers of music, we have the time we don't know what we want. And
Yeah.
whatever is popular at that time may not be popular in even 6 months' time.
Mhm. Yeah. I think that music, I mean, what music ended up becoming for me was related to memory. And I was finding, especially maybe in the early 2000s, I found the huge shift when Britney Spears came out, right? My generation, it really mattered if you wrote your song. Everybody wanted to know whether you wrote it or not. There was like integrity behind performing your own stuff, being that singer-songwriter, that I just don't think people care as much about anymore. Although I think they like the person as a whole more. I don't know how to explain it because with the accessibility that we have with the internet. But at that time, it really mattered like how much you did on the record, how much you played, how much you actually wrote. And I remember always like tracking that and other people caring about that around me. Um, and I found that big shift in the early 2000s when it was kind of that manufactured pop again, where there's writers behind it, but really amazing performers and uh, super like it's undeniable. I love Britney Spears. I love the Backstreet Boys. I love Max Martin. I went to see Anne Juliet when I was in London, England. Like I just love that stuff. It's but it's different for me, different to me. And I think I kind of lost my train of thought there. But yeah, I just feel like that was a real shift that 2000. So for me, my train of thought, this is it. I started really listening to the musicians that I was meeting and hearing live and running into, and they were selling their CDs on the side of the stage, and so I would buy their CDs, and that would be my playlist for the next couple months until I saw another band that I really really loved. And so I have all these bands that I love that are just moments in time of my life and my memories. And I think everybody else does too. And it's what you have access to, not necessarily um, what is popular, but generally what is popular is what we have access to, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So aside from the recording and performing processes, what do you remember about those years of around the time that you were producing the album?
Around 1997. Um, or well, definitely remember when the Princess Diana died. That was a big, I remember that happening. It happened on the day that I got home from Lilith Fair. And I remember being really sad. That's a strange thing to remember. Um, the other things were I had to write my GED for high school because I didn't make enough attendance days to get my final year of high school. So I ended up having to write my GED. So I remember working on that and studying that. Um, I remember just going to a lot of offices, like an agent's office and a um, publisher's office, and kind of all these meetings. They really dominate my memory because I think I was excited or had anxiety about them or didn't understand what was happening. Yeah, I guess I just really remember touring. I remember living out of a suitcase. finding out where we're going to go next. I remember playing a lot with a man named Kevin Fox, who plays cello. So I did do a few date tours with a full band that really created the sound on the record. But most of the touring I did was just as a duo with Kevin, and it was awesome. We were just really portable and easy to work with and fun, and I really adored Kevin very, very much. And I think he plays a lot with like Stephen Page now from the Bare Naked Ladies. And I think he plays with Chantal Kreviazek sometimes and some other great Canadian artists. So I remember a lot of touring with him. uh, I remember just I lived in the beaches of Toronto at the time, and I loved living in that neighborhood and uh, just going for walks on the beach and playing my guitar on my porch. Um, I remember going home to Stratford and everyone being really excited that I had a record out and being really supportive and hanging out with my friends. Um, I did move back to Stratford after that album, probably around 2000. Was able to kind of get my own apartment finally and get myself up on my feet, and that was really fun. Yeah, but that's mainly what I remember. Yeah.
Um, so this might be a strange question, but how did making the album change your self-perception as a musician?
Oh. Um, it's challenging to remember my perception before, to be honest. Uh, how did making the well, I think when I set out to make it, when I was writing the songs, I really had these strong ideas of what I wanted it to sound like. And I really worked hard to get them there, including having conflicts with my producer and pushing him harder and getting these things where I wanted them to be and how I heard them in my head. My second album, I was working with Jim and we had a set band, like, drummer, this is the drummer, this is the bass player, this is the guitar player, this is the keyboard player, this is what we're doing. This is the amp we're using. And so the whole record kind of sounds like the same production, which I think is kind of generally how most records sound. Um, and on that record, I really decided that I was just going to sit back and let things happen and see what happens and kind of let the magic of musicians coming together make a record. Um, so that was definitely different. Uh, I realized that on that first record that not everything turns out exactly how you want it in your head, and that it's just not able to do it. Uh, so to relax a bit on that, I definitely went through a big change with my voice from my first record to my second record. And I'm actually really finding out about that right now in my life. Um, I've I have a really big problem with nasal polyps, and uh, they did an X-ray of my head, and I've got a deviated septum to one side, so it's really hard to kind of treat nasal polyps when you have deviated septum, and that happens when you mature and your mouth kind of grows a little bigger and your septum kind of gets bent a little tiny bit. And so the resonance that I have in my head is just not the same as that I had when I recorded my first record. I sound different. And I really struggled with singing on my second record. And I think part of that was because I was so used to hearing my head, my sound, uh, my voice in headphones and on a microphone live. And so I was actually singing quieter because I knew the mic was going to pick me up and that I wasn't resonating like I was prior to recording my first record. I never sang into a microphone. I did all my singing was just done in a room and or a auditorium or a church even. I'm not religious anymore, but I was raised Presbyterian and sang a lot in church. And so I had this giant voice that I would project everywhere. And as soon as a microphone was put in front of me, I made it a little smaller. And so my voice on my second record doesn't sound the same as my first. And it's because of uh, the way that I started singing on a microphone. And then I had to take lessons to relearn how to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. I suppose something that I was getting at is that I imagine that once the album becomes successful and you're recognized as a musician, um I I I wonder if you ever ask yourself like what what percentage, so to speak, of my life am I going to put into music in general? Because
Yeah.
you have to live as a person too. You have your personal life, your family, your uh, I imagine other things that are going on, and I wonder, has that question entered your mind at any time during?
Oh yeah, absolutely. More later in my life though, like when I was young, I was just kind of all in with the music and giving everything to that. And I regret that. I missed weddings. But at the same time, my life was scheduled so far in advance that I couldn't renege on something that I had committed to. It was just a very strange um, lifestyle, to be honest. At the same time, I didn't know anything else. So it was a little bit strange. I wasn't famous enough to like get recognized too often on the streets. Like that wasn't an issue for me, nor was it something I wanted. Like I really loved being in the background. One of the reasons I really loved Trent Severn because it wasn't under my name. Like it wasn't my name on a poster or these kind of things. Um, I do like the producer role, being kind of in the background, working on music. Um, yeah, it definitely took a toll on me finding a home life and settling down. This life isn't conducive to a routine, and it's very hard even right now with my family to schedule things, find that routine, and for them to adjust when I just, oh, I need to do this for a week, and for them to support me. It's just very different, I think, than other people who go to work every day, and you can count on what that's going to look like. Not that every job is like that. Um, but yeah, it's definitely not helped personal relationships in any way, being a musician. I think you would think that it does because there's this connection of music or um, sometimes I often wonder if people just think I'm having more fun and so it makes them uncomfortable or something along that line, but I'm not having more fun. I'm working just as hard and definitely like relatives who aren't in my close inner circle like in the past like, um, definitely don't understand that I can't just walk on stage and play my show and walk off and be the same person. There's a bunch of prep work that has to be done. I have to practice for my shows. I have to warm up my voice. I have to do all these things. Um, I also have to kind of make a set list and run through what I'm going to say in between songs. There's just a lot of prep work to do when you're doing live shows and things like that. And um, the other part of it that I think is challenging is that it's project based. So you're constantly working on a different project. So maybe you're working on writing all the songs for the next record. And what you need for that is some solitude. Maybe you're working on producing the record. And what you need for that is long hours in a studio. It looks a little bit different. And then you're planning the marketing and touring of that album. And that might look like a 9 to 5 desk job for a little bit while. And then you go out on the road and then you're just not there. So it is I think it's tough on family routines. I think it's just tough on family routines. Yeah.
Yeah, if I could get a little bit personal, so I'm currently back in my home city, Hanoi, Vietnam, and one of the first thing that I would do is I would go visit the grave of my grandmother who passed away last year. And
Mm.
when she passed away, I was abroad, so I wasn't able
I'm sorry.
to see her. But she lived a long and fulfilling life at the age of 90. So
Mhm.
so it was a blessing that yeah she passed away at that time rather than earlier at more difficult circumstances. But
Yeah.
yeah, when I visit my grandmother, I sort of I sort of realized that you know I there were some priorities that I need to recheck because you know I'm not a musician, but there there are times when I can be a little bit wrapped up in say my studies or my interests and etc. as well as whatever personal troubles that I was encountering at that time, which was quite a bit. Last year was particularly tough on me. But
Mhm.
I realized that you know there are times when you need to step away from that and be a little bit more attentive to what other people are going through, and
Mhm.
you know, and of course, try to start enjoying other aspects of life than the ones that you're familiar with. So I'm not sure if that makes sense to you.
It does, yeah. So I've definitely been through those periods of my life too. And honestly, m music has had to take a back seat during those. And I think in a way, I'm lucky I have a career like that where I can decide when this project starts and ends. And um, yeah, it's uh someone's one of my guitar player's wives said to me, "Well, ambition is overrated." Once, and I never forgot that. And I was very ambitious in my 20s, and I remember mulling that over and over again in my head. And um it is overrated to a point, but we have this drive inside of us. We all have a drive that my husband's a pilot. I mean, that it's his life's work. He decided he was going to be a pilot when he was 6. Like this is his thing. And um I think as humans, we're just driven to work on some level and have a self-satisfaction from it. And uh, I don't quite understand it. Um, but yeah, we definitely have to prioritize our relationships and our families. And um, sometimes I feel uncomfortable with just with the satisfaction of that. I think I also uh, kind of think the Lilith Fair, that the generation I came out of women singer-songwriters, um, like I definitely felt like, oh, if I just become a mom and a wife, I'm not doing it enough. Um, and I felt like it was marketed to me that that was not enough, that I'm the new generation of women. And um, at the same time, I remember being on Lilith Fair and going, "Hey, I don't know what you guys are really talking about. I grew up thinking I could be a doctor or anything I wanted." And that's the truth. Like my parents, I didn't even know there was a such thing as inequality until very late in my teens. Like I know that that sounds really naive, and I guess I'm just naive, but that's how I was raised. I was never told I couldn't do anything, and I was never told that a family has to look a certain way. So I felt like that was a win that that I didn't know in a way. But yeah, I love going for walks. I love spending time with my dog. I love my family. I love spending time with them more than anything. Um, Sometimes I think I should just stop doing this and just enjoy my life. Um, but I can't. I just love spreading the joy in the music and being around people who love music. So uh it's community really. And I do think our communities don't look the way maybe they naturally should anymore. And so we seek it out in different ways in our studies, in our jobs, in our um, activities like I do. But yeah, I think that's a complicated issue. But yeah, I've definitely gone through definitely in the past couple of years, some really traumatic stuff for my family, and they've just had to come first. And uh, that's why I drop off. Sometimes I drop off, and that's what I'm dealing with, and then I come back.
Yeah. Well, yeah, of course, whatever you're doing, either dropping off or coming back, I hope you find it fulfilling.
Well, thank you. You too. And I hope you get a chance to connect with your family while you're there before you go back to school.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so too. I'm currently making the connections as much as
Great.
I can.
Awesome. Good for you. Well, thanks for this again. And I'll keep you posted. Uh, I might have another album coming next year, I think. So we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I look
Yeah.
forward to listening to it and featuring
Thanks
it on
so
this
much.
meeting. Okay. Yeah. Have a good weekend. Thank you again.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. Bye.